My brother has been hitting on my wife for years, yet my parents kept enabling it. At dinner, my wife revealed my mother's affair. Now, my brother is stalking us. The notification glowed on my phone, a tiny heart emoji celebrating a future that now felt terrifyingly fragile. Just hours later, I got a call that would freeze the blood in my veins. My brother, Ethan, was sitting on our doorstep, waiting for my pregnant wife to come home. It all started, I suppose, with an invitation. My parents had asked my wife and me to a special meal, a gathering with other family members to commemorate their 25th wedding anniversary. It was supposed to be this wonderful family get-together, but even before the recent escalation, I was wrestling with a lot of conflicting feelings, a deep reluctance churning in my gut about going. The major reason, Ethan, my younger brother, we're only 3 years apart, but from the moment I can remember, we've never been close. There's no solid relationship to speak of, and a lot of that I've come to realize stems from his deep-seated animosity towards me. It's been that way since we were just small kids. Growing up, our parents were incredibly strict, especially my father. Dad spent years in the military, and that perspective, that relentless demand for discipline and competition, clearly influenced how he raised us. He constantly pushed us to compete against one another. It didn't matter if it was a race to the school bus in the morning or trying to outdo each other while doing chores around the house. Everything felt like a contest between Ethan and me. It wasn't just about giving your all, it was about outperforming your brother. In the beginning, I honestly thought the rivalry wasn't too awful. Maybe even it was healthy at first. We were just kids, right? A little competition is supposed to be character building, but as time marched on, things began to shift. My brother started to slip behind, notably in school. I, on the other hand, was always good with my schoolwork. I'd consistently pull B's and A's, ace examinations, and bring home report cards that made my parents beam with pride. Unfortunately, my success, only made matters worse for Ethan. Because I was doing so well, my father was always holding me up as the benchmark. "Look at your brother," he'd say, his voice a low growl. "Why can't you be more like him?" When Ethan didn't measure up, and he often didn't, he would face terrible consequences. He wasn't permitted to eat supper some evenings. He was forced to stand in a corner for hours, sometimes until his little legs gave out beneath him. I could see, even then, how much it wounded him, not just physically, but deep in his spirit. My father even had me teach Ethan, believing that if I helped him study, his grades would magically improve. I didn't mind assisting, I genuinely wanted to help, but my abilities were limited. The plain truth was that Ethan did not love studying. It simply wasn't his thing. He was more of a fun, energetic child who thrived outdoors, running around, using his imagination to build worlds. Sitting motionless with a book bored him to tears, no matter how hard anyone, even I, worked to make it happen. Looking back, I can see how this constant external validation for one child, at the expense of another, created a dangerous dynamic. It fostered a golden child and a scapegoat scenario, where one child internalizes success as their identity, and the other internalizes failure and resentment, shaping their entire self-worth around these roles. As the years passed, it became excruciatingly clear that the continual comparisons and pressure had taken an immense toll on Ethan. He began to resent me, and I honestly understand why. He must have felt as if he was constantly one step behind, perpetually falling short, no matter how hard he tried. And here's the thing, I will acknowledge something that's difficult to even articulate. I was so laser-focused on making our father proud, on being the perfect son, that I didn't truly notice how deeply it was affecting my younger brother. I never truly considered how that must have felt for him, constantly living in my shadow, being punished for not looking, acting, or achieving like me. But that was only the beginning of the nightmare. Then, just as I was preparing to leave for college, something happened that ripped through our family, shaking us to our core. Ethan did something truly horrible. He consumed an entire bottle of sleeping tablets. The sheer terror of that moment still grips me. Fortunately, our parents found him in time and rushed him to the hospital. The medics were able to save him, for which I will be eternally thankful. But that moment, that single, horrifying moment, altered everything. It was as if someone had yanked the blindfolds off my parents, especially my father. For the very first time, they seemed to recognize the profound agony Ethan had been concealing, how deeply he had been aching all these years. It took something as catastrophic, something that could have resulted in his death, for them to finally see the harm that had been building up inside him for so long. After the overdose, things at home changed dramatically. My parents began taking Ethan to therapy sessions, desperate to better understand what he was going through. Since then, They've treated him as if he were made of fragile glass, convinced that every incorrect phrase or bit of pressure would cause him to crack, to shatter again. Over the years, I've also apologized to my brother several times. I've told him I'm sorry for not being more alert, for not sticking up for him when we were younger. I've genuinely attempted to make things right between the two of us. But even now, after all these years, it feels like my parents are still babying him. They are continually walking on eggshells around him. After high school, when my father wanted Ethan to go to college, my brother pulled the same old trick. He threatened to commit suicide again, claiming he couldn't live away from home and didn't need any more education. So he never went, never got a valid degree. Unsurprisingly, Ethan has struggled to find consistent, high-paying work. Even when he manages to get a job, he struggles to keep it. He either skips too many days or has a loud disagreement with co-workers, which invariably leads to his termination. It's like a recurring, predictable pattern. He still lives at home, does not pay rent, and relies entirely on our parents for everything. Groceries, bills, daily expenses, you name it, they cover it. This pattern, where parents enable a child's dependence out of fear, especially after a past trauma like Ethan's overdose, often falls into the realm of codependency. It inadvertently reinforces the very behaviors they fear, trapping everyone in a cycle where true growth and accountability are impossible. Just to be clear, my brother does not currently have any confirmed mental illnesses. He attends therapy on occasion, and aside from the despair he experienced back then, he appears to be doing well now. He's functioning. He isn't struggling like he used to. In reality, he has a close circle of friends with whom he spends every day. They smoke together, they drink, they attend parties. It's not like he's sitting at home withdrawn and secluded. He is living his life. The only catch is that he's doing it on my parents' cash. That, I believe, is the most frustrating aspect for me. My parents never push challenge or ask him to step up. They are simply too afraid. And I understand that fear. They are frightened of pushing him too far and losing him again. And he understands that, too. He understands just how to tap into that dread, how to manipulate it. At times, it appears like he is deliberately taking advantage of the situation. Because of all this, I've always felt terrible for my parents. So, when they asked me to send money back home to help them with their everyday expenditures, I couldn't say no. I know they're retired now and don't have the same income they did before. And with Ethan not contributing a single cent, I feel like it's the least I can do to help them in this difficult circumstance. Since then, I've been sending money every single month to help out, while my brother lives as if he doesn't have a care in the world. And it's truly come to the point where I feel compelled to take up the slack in the family, to be the responsible one, the one who cleans up the messes. My wife knows my entire family history now, and honestly, she has a great disdain for my brother. And it's not only because he's, frankly, a terrible son to my parents, he's also made her feel profoundly uncomfortable on several occasions. You see, Ethan is always, and I mean always, flirting with my wife. He has always been extremely attentive to her, tries to be touch-feely around her, and even makes inappropriately suggestive comments. He does it all under the pretense of being fun or nice. And if I dare to call him out on it, he dismisses it with a casual laugh, claiming I'm just exaggerating or being too sensitive. What makes matters infinitely worse is how my parents deal with these situations. They do not recognize it for what it truly is. Instead of confronting Ethan or supporting me, they disregard it entirely. They claim it's simply a harmless crush, as if it was some innocent schoolboy behavior. Sometimes they even make subtle comments that appear to encourage it. I mean, here's an example. When my wife first met my parents, the event was meant to be warm and inviting. You know, the standard meet the family stuff. But while we were all sitting around chatting, my mother said to my wife, who was then just my girlfriend, something like, "You are so funny. You know, you'd actually be a much better match for my other son, Ethan. You two have the same kind of humor." She even laughed a little as she said this, as if she thought it was a funny, harmless comment. Then my father chimed in, agreeing with her. He said to my wife, "Yeah, Ethan is a hoot. You'll probably have more fun with someone like him." I remember sitting there, a cold knot forming in my stomach, wondering if I had heard correctly. Why were they attempting to link my brother and my partner? Who would say such a thing to their partner? My wife and I were both taken aback by their statements at first. We assumed they were kidding and tried to laugh it off. However, my parents have, without fail, continued to suggest that my wife would have been a better match for my brother. It's as if they've never stopped thinking about this. They've often remarked things like, "She's so much more like Ethan," or commented on how my wife and Ethan have such similar personalities. As if this somehow means she ended up with the wrong son. Even on our wedding day, just before the ceremony, my mother pulled my wife aside and asked her, "Are you sure you want to marry him?" It was as if she was giving my partner one last chance to back out, truly hoping my wife would change her mind and just leave. Can you even imagine how devastating that was to hear on your wedding day? I had a massive argument with my parents about this, and almost shut them out of my life right then and there. They offered a half-hearted apology, pledging never to speak that way to my wife again, but the subtle, insidious comments never stopped. Every year on my brother's birthday, they make an extra effort to persuade my wife to stand next to him for photographs or videos. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable we feel. They'll say things like, "Come on, you two look so good in pictures together," or "Just one photo." Don't be so stiff. It's subtle, but it's consistent. No matter how many times we attempt to dismiss it or gently move the situation, it persists. When we've brought this up, genuinely tried to have an honest talk about how uncomfortable all of this is for us, my folks have just shrugged it off as if it were nothing. My mother usually tries to rationalize it by claiming that my brother has never had a decent girlfriend and is simply smitten with my wife since she is so attractive and he enjoys standing next to her. My father is no better. He says things like, "What's the harm in standing next to him for a photo if it makes your brother happy?" He truly feels it's not a huge problem, that it's just a minor detail, but it isn't. It's an emotional invasion. We eventually had enough. We stopped attending family occasions with my brother because we were made to feel uncomfortable and disregarded far too often. No birthdays, no gatherings, nothing. We pulled back entirely. I stopped visiting my parents, and so did my wife. However, my mother insisted that we come this time because she had invited all of my cousins and distant relatives, and she didn't want me to miss it in case people started asking questions. I was still on the fence. I'd been going back and forth in my mind about it constantly. Part of me wanted to go just to see other family members to reconnect, but the other part of me kept replaying everything that had happened over the years, how they had treated my wife, how they had always made excuses for my brother, and how they continued to ignore our boundaries as if they didn't exist. Do I go, pretend everything is well simply to maintain the peace, or do I stay away to safeguard the tiny corner we've managed to carve out for ourselves? We chose to go for my parents' wedding anniversary. It was a huge mistake. Throughout the initial ceremony, my folks were overjoyed to see me. My mother grabbed me in a passionate hug and told me she didn't expect me to come. How glad she was that I did. I just nodded and smiled a tight, fixed expression. Everything was going smoothly, or so I thought, until supper. We were all sitting around the table, catching up, making light conversation. Then one of my aunts casually said that all of my cousins were married or in relationships, with the sole exception of my brother Ethan. She smiled a bit and asked him, half jokingly, why he was still unmarried and whether he was dating anybody he might marry soon. My brother only grinned uncomfortably and preened, as if he was trying to hide something, as if he knew something we didn't. Then one of the cousins playfully shouted, "Come on, Ethan. Spill it. Do you have a crush or what?" That's when my mother, without missing a beat, said loudly enough for the whole table to hear, "Oh, I don't know about a girlfriend, but he does have a huge crush on his brother's wife." She then pointed her finger directly at my wife and laughed, a shrill, forced sound, as if it was the funniest thing ever conceived. My father joined in, laughing even louder, his eyes crinkling in amusement. My wife and I both froze. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold dread washing over me. I looked up from my plate, my jaw tense, and locked eyes with my mother, but she didn't notice. She was too busy laughing and chatting to my aunt, saying something about how my brother had been entranced with my wife for so many years, as if it was some kind of romantic movie storyline and not a completely improper fixation to be obsessed with your own brother's spouse. As if that wasn't enough, my aunt, emboldened by my mother's brazenness, turned to my wife and said loudly and without hesitation, "Do you have any sisters or female cousins Ethan could possibly date?" Some of the family chuckled, a nervous, complicit sound. My brother merely sat there blushing, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if everything was perfectly normal. He didn't try to shut down my parents. He didn't try to redirect the topic elsewhere. He merely sat there, soaking in the attention, as though it was flattering. I could feel the heat rising on my face, a burning wave of indignation. I turned to face my wife, who sat there, her shoulders hunched, looking utterly embarrassed and mortified. This was the final straw. I didn't even think. I just snapped. I spoke loudly enough for everyone at the table to hear. And I turned to my mother, my voice trembling with suppressed fury, and asked, "How dare you talk about my wife like this?" The entire table became silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I looked at my parents, my eyes blazing, and said, "You promised me, both of you, that you wouldn't cross this line again. You swore that you'd respect our boundaries and stop putting us in uncomfortable situations. But here we are again. You're laughing about my brother having a crush on my wife. You think this is funny?" My voice shook, but I didn't care anymore. Then I turned to the rest of the table, my cousins, aunts, and uncles, and said, "Let me ask you all something. How many of you think it's okay for someone to openly say they have a crush on their own sibling's partner, and for the whole family to laugh about it like it's some kind of sitcom scene? Do you think this is normal?" No one said anything. My aunt's grin was completely gone. Others drank their beverages hesitantly, their gazes glued to their plates. Suddenly, no one had an answer. What we were experiencing at that table was a classic form of emotional gaslighting and boundary violation. When someone consistently dismisses your discomfort, labels your legitimate feelings as exaggeration or jokes, and actively encourages disrespectful behavior, they are systematically undermining your perception of reality and invalidating your emotional experience. It's a profound act of psychological control designed to make you question your own sanity. I then went to my brother and just let it all out. "You've been acting like a creep around my wife for years," I screamed, my voice quivering with rage, no longer caring who heard. "You flirt with her every time we're around. You've sent her late night texts, even though she's never replied. You try to stand too close to her, touch her when she's clearly uncomfortable, and then act like it's all a joke." My brother's face sank immediately, the smirk replaced by a look of bewildered shock. I looked around the table again and continued, "And you all think this is funny? You really think it's okay for someone to act this way toward their brother's wife?" I turned back to my parents, "And you, too. How many times have you made comments about how my wife and Ethan would be such a good match? You've been doing this for years. You even said stuff like this at our wedding. Do you even realize how messed up that is? How incredibly disrespectful it is?" I was also upset with my aunt for falling for my mother's provocation for echoing such an inappropriate sentiment. So, I looked directly at her and asked, "Would you ever say this kind of stuff about your own son's partner? Would you tell your daughter-in-law that she'd be a better fit for someone else in the family? Would you let your son act like that around someone else's wife?" She looked stunned, her face paling, and shook her head slowly. "Exactly," I said, the word cutting through the tense silence. "So, why are you comfortable with my parents doing this to me?" You could feel the room contracting into itself, the air growing thick with unspoken truths. Everyone felt uncomfortable now, not because of my outburst, but because I stated what needed to be spoken, something everyone most likely already knew, but chose to ignore. My parents sat there, absolutely startled. My father looked like he was about to burst, his cheeks flushed a deep crimson, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles were white. In contrast, my mother began to panic. She tried to laugh it off, her voice shaky and high-pitched, saying, "I didn't mean anything by it. Come on, it's not that serious. It's just a harmless crush. We've always just joked like that about your wife and Ethan. I'm sorry, but it is just funny. And I wasn't really trying to offend anyone." That's when my wife, who had been sitting next to me all evening, silent and humiliated, finally snapped. She moved her chair back slightly, the scrape a harsh sound in the quiet room, and looked straight at my mother. Her voice was calm, cutting, and loud enough for everyone to hear each word a precisely aimed dart. "Oh, I get it now," she said. "Since everything's just a joke to you, I guess cheating on your husband all those years ago was just for fun, too, right?" My mother's eyes were wide, dilated with shock and horror. "I mean," my wife added, her tone becoming harsher, "I guess you had a harmless crush on the neighbor too, right? And I guess when you decided to sleep with him, it didn't mean anything. It was just for fun, wasn't it?" The whole space was quiet, a vacuum of sound and emotion. My father looked as if he had been hit in the stomach, his face ashen, his body slumping. My mother became white in the face, completely devastated. I couldn't hold back a pleased, almost savage, laugh. What my wife had stated was totally correct. My parents had hidden this unpleasant little secret from everyone for years. Long ago, my mother cheated on my father with their neighbor, and when he discovered it, she begged him not to leave. He stayed, but only for me and my brother. He appeared to have forgiven her, or at least moved on. But my wife knows the truth because I told her. She'd carried that secret for many years. Finally, she had turned the facts around and used it as a weapon, a devastating counterpunch to get back at my mother for always hurting her, for constantly undermining our relationship. She had endured years of pain, inappropriate comments, strange jokes, and watching my parents treat her as if she were a prize for my brother rather than my partner, before finally resorting to the one thing she knew would put an end to everything. My mother came out of her disbelief and quickly began ranting at my wife. She yelled that my wife had no right to bring up that previous affair in front of everyone and that she had gone too far. My father also jumped in, his voice increasing in volume and anger, saying that bringing up the past was rude and pointless, but I was having none of that. I stood up, slamming my hands on the table, and shouted back, "You crossed the line the moment you made my wife the punchline to your creepy jokes? The moment you kept defending Ethan like he was some kind of harmless little boy when he's been making my wife uncomfortable for years? Don't you dare talk about disrespect when you've disrespected our marriage over and over again." My mother began to cry in front of everyone, trying to spin it around as if she was the victim now. However, people were still digesting the idea that my mother had cheated on my father when everyone believed they were the perfect pair, an unbreakable unit. Ethan eventually opened his mouth, only to yell at me for spoiling the celebration. "You always have to make everything about you," he spat, his face twisted with anger. I just gazed at him, surprised that this was what he took away from it all. "You think I'm the one making this about me," I said, my voice calm but forceful. "You sat there and let Mom announce your crush on my wife like it was some joke. You didn't say a word to stop it. You blushed like it wasn't disgusting. You let them humiliate me and my wife again in front of everyone, and now you're mad at me for standing up." He scowled at me and raised his arms wistfully. "Oh, please. You always act like the victim. No one even said anything that bad." My wife and I decided we couldn't stay a moment longer. While my parents and Ethan continued to yell and blame each other, their voices rising in a chaotic crescendo, we knew there was no point. The ranting did not appear to be stopping anytime soon. And honestly, what was the purpose in remaining? They were clearly uninterested in listening to or comprehending our point of view. They simply wanted to be furious and play the victim. So, without another word, we silently collected up our belongings and went away. "We're done," I said before departing, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Don't dare to contact us unless you all grow up and are willing to accept some responsibility." Since that night, my phone has been continually buzzing. The majority of the calls and texts came from my mother, but a couple also came from my father. They're angry and relentlessly guilt-tripping. They kept telling me that my wife and I had no right to reveal Mom's adultery, especially in front of the entire family. According to them, we utterly ruined their so-called picture-perfect marriage by revealing my mother's affair to everyone. My mother, in particular, has been unrelenting. She claims she has been humiliated, that everyone now looks at her differently, and that we have ruined her reputation. Because of all of this, my mother now expects my wife to publicly apologize to her for what she said at dinner. My mother feels that my wife owes her an apology for exposing her hypocrisy and bringing up an issue that, in her opinion, should have been left alone. It's truly exhausting, a relentless assault on our peace of mind. After days of debating in my own brain, the arguments swirling in my head, I eventually picked up the phone and called my folks. I knew the talk was going to be difficult, almost certainly painful, but I also knew I had to say what needed to be said, simply and frankly. I informed them quietly but firmly that after all they had said and done, not just at that terrible meal, but over the years, I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay between us. I said that my wife and I were wary of being insulted, wary of being undermined. I stated that I had spent years trying to preserve the peace, sending money every month to assist them out, not only because they had requested it, but because I honestly believed it was the correct thing to do. I wanted to help them since they were my parents, and Ethan was plainly not contributing anything. But today, given how they have continued to treat us after all of the humiliation, apparent favoritism, and utter lack of responsibility, I informed them I could no longer continue. I informed them that I would be breaking off all communication. No more phone calls, no more visits, no more cash assistance. I stated that this was the only option for me and my wife to mend and live in harmony. My parents did not take it well. When I told them I was cutting them off financially, they totally lost it. My mother began shouting at me, calling me ungrateful and accusing me of abandoning my family. My father intervened, claiming I was turning my back on the people who had reared me for years, on the people who loved me unconditionally. They kept telling me I was overreacting to what they claimed was simply a joke. They never accepted responsibility or apologized for their faults. My mother even accused my wife of turning me against them, as if I lacked the mental capacity to make my own judgments. They practically cursed me, saying I'd regret it for the rest of my life when my wife ultimately left me. It was hard to hear, the words cutting deep, but I didn't give up. I held my ground and stopped the call. Since then, my wife and I have blocked them. It's been over 3 months since my previous update, and a lot has transpired since then. First and foremost, after cutting off my brother and warning him several times, Ethan has persisted in writing my wife weird, unsolicited love notes. Even when we threatened to involve the police, he didn't appear to care. Then, a month ago, my wife and I got some amazing news. We are pregnant and expecting a child. We were beyond thrilled and, in our excitement, spread the good news on social media. This was plainly a tremendous error because events earlier this week took a truly scary turn. When my wife returned home from work, she was surprised to discover Ethan sitting on our doorstep, waiting for her. He began to get up as soon as she noticed him. She instantly felt a profound unease, a prickle of fear, so she backed away slowly, got back into her car, and began driving away while he ran towards it, begging her to remain and talk to him. I can't begin to imagine how terrified she must have felt in that moment. Seeing him there, the familiar face transformed into a lurking shadow. She called, her voice trembling, and I hurried home as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. We both called the police straight away, but because Ethan hadn't officially committed any laws yet, such as physically assaulting my wife or breaking into our home, they couldn't arrest him. According to the police, he has not committed a crime, only repeated harassment. So, they let him go with a warning, which upsets me to no end. He's breaking so many unspoken rules, so many boundaries, yet the law can't seem to do much until it's too late, until someone gets hurt. However, we did consult with a lawyer, and he is assisting us in filing a restraining order against my brother. My wife no longer feels safe in our current house. I also don't want to endanger her or our unborn child in case Ethan shows up again, in case his delusion escalates further. So, we've made the difficult decision to sell our property and relocate to a different place, far away from all of this chaos, before our child arrives. I'm beyond frustrated and utterly drained. This situation is out of control, and I am doing everything in my power to protect my wife and child. I cannot allow anything to happen to them. It's a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that sometimes the only way to save yourself and the future you're building is to sever ties with the very people who gave you life. But I know now, deep in my bones, that our peace, our safety, and the well-being of our unborn child are non-negotiable. They are worth every difficult conversation, every uncomfortable silence, and every painful goodbye. This journey has taught me so much about the complex web of family dynamics and the crucial importance of drawing firm lines. But I have to ask you, where do you believe the line truly lies between unwavering family loyalty and the absolute necessity of self-preservation and protecting your own peace? This story highlights several critical psychological and social dynamics that often play out in dysfunctional family systems. When parents actively pit siblings against each other, as seen with the narrator and Ethan, it can create a golden child and scapegoat dynamic. The golden child may internalize the need for external validation and success, while the scapegoat can develop deep-seated resentment, feelings of inadequacy, and a fractured self-esteem. This competitive environment fundamentally damages the sibling bond and fosters long-term animosity, teaching children that love and acceptance are conditional on outperforming others. After Ethan's suicide attempt, the parents shifted from strictness to extreme enabling, fearing another tragedy. This response, while seemingly protective, is a classic example of codependency. Their fear prevented them from setting healthy boundaries or encouraging Ethan's independence, inadvertently reinforcing his reliance and entitlement. Codependency creates a cycle where the enabler's anxiety prevents the dependent individual from facing consequences and developing essential life skills, trapping both parties in an unhealthy dynamic. The parent's consistent dismissal of the narrator and his wife's discomfort, their labeling of legitimate concerns as jokes or exaggerations, and their active encouragement of Ethan's inappropriate behavior towards the wife are textbook examples of gaslighting and boundary violations. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where a person or group makes someone question their own sanity, perception of reality, or memories. In this narrative, it served to invalidate the couple's feelings and systematically undermine their emotional experience, creating an environment where their discomfort was deemed wrong or overreactive. This constant invalidation is a profound act of disrespect and can be deeply damaging to self-trust and emotional well-being. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for recognizing unhealthy patterns in your own relationships and for cultivating stronger, more respectful interactions. If you find yourself in similar situations, remember that setting clear boundaries and seeking external support can be vital steps towards healing and self-preservation.